Here comes our second panel discussion on the topic, profitability versus sustainability, a zero-sum game. Nowadays, with increasing environmental concerns from different stakeholders, businesses need to jump on the sustainability bandwagon. But how do we tackle if it means eroding profits and shareholder returns? Are there any alternatives? Today, our panelists will lead us to look into such dilemma. So please join me to welcome Mr. Duncan Wong, founder and CEO, CryptoBlock Limited. Mr. Chandran Nair, founder and CEO, Global Institute for Tomorrow. Ms. Kat Roost, Global Head, Technology, Standard Chartered Bank. Mr. Ben Sinfendorfer, CEO, Silk Road Associates. Mr. Andrew Work, founder and CEO, New Work Media, will moderate this discussion. Welcome. All right, Andrew, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. And I want to start off, people, this is remarkable. I'd like to start off by saying thank you to the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park for putting real people in a real room. I can't remember the last time I was mic'd up on stage. So let's hear it for the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. I'm thrilled. We're here to talk about profitability versus sustainability. There is a tension, but let there be no mistake. If a company is not profitable, it dies. But if we, as a species, do not practice business sustainably, we all die. It should be obvious. Cut your energy costs, cut your water costs, cut your product inputs, and you'll make more money. You'll be more profitable, right? But we know it's not always like that. Sometimes dirty is cheap to make profits. Oh, the costs are still there. The health costs, the environmental costs, they get pushed off to somebody else. And that is why we have to resolve this tension. It is not an option. It absolutely must happen. And that's what we have a great panel to talk about today. Now, we want to start off talking about companies and the relationship with government. Companies have to keep their customers happy, but now they have to keep activists, stakeholders, local residents, even their competitors happy. They have to get along with other people in their industry, and they have to keep government happy. Government is also dealing with all those people, putting pressure on government, and putting pressure on government to deal with business. How do we resolve this? Chandran Nair, I know you kicked off today, but I want you to address a little bit more this question of government and business. You know, how should they be relating to each other so we can move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I just go back to, the headline, profitability versus sustainability. I think it's a totally wrong framing, and that's the problem we have. We somehow want to make it clear to people who work in business, I come from a business background, that I have a right to a profit. Well, profitability is not a right. It's a social construct. And depending on what you do, there are meant to be rules. Most of us cheat. It's called tax evasion, everything else, pollution, etc., to essentially gain the privileges we want in terms of the right. So, but the sustainability issue, and again, the panel before was a great, the word sustainability is used so interchangeably that some people talked about sustainable profits. Some people talked about sustainability as though it's something to do with the jockey club. And as though, oh, you're the good guys, how do we guys become like you? So it's a very shallow discussion and understanding. So firstly, I'd like to say the zero-sum thing. The very ideological premise of free markets is a zero-sum. It's taught in business schools. It's called competitive advantage. I win, you lose, right? So let's be very clear about what we're talking about. Profitability is not essentially a right. It's a construct. That construct is essentially one for which there are rules, because business doesn't sit in isolation from society. And why do you have rules? You have rules because you and I are subject to essentially bad behavior. We will cheat if we can, and we get away. That's why all societies have rules. That's why you can't carry a gun in Hong Kong. There is a rule. It says this is not good for us. So in my view, the idea that governments should work together with businesses and make businesses viable, this is not essentially the construct of how things should work out. It's become the narrative that we all become seduced by, but it's not the role of government to make businesses survive. The role of government is essentially create public good within which there is a way we organize our economy within which there is essentially standards of prosperity that can be enjoyed by all. It is not about making sure your company succeeds, which, as we all know, vested interests have essentially usurped governments all over the world. I mean, there are some who suggest in this society of ours that the property sector has usurped the role of the state.
Okay.
So I think that's a wrong way of looking at it. The role of a society, well-constructed society in which the state, whatever way you want to define it, essentially provides the boundaries around which businesses work. Businesses that do not have a free ride. Now, even when they do that, governments now increasingly have to tighten essentially the rules. And I'll just give you one example as a technical example, and then, this is a long conversation. But let's just take air quality, for instance. Urban air quality is deteriorated in most cities in the world, right? 9 out of 10 people in the world today breathe a bad air quality. It's just not Indian cities and Chinese. Now, air quality improvements require essentially not telling automotive companies, be good citizens.
Sure.
Because they don't do that. Or telling power companies, don't burn dirty coal. It comes through strong legislation.
Okay.
And the strong legislation is driven by science. Who fights strong legislation? Companies who think they have a right to profitability, burn bad coal, bad oil, and then cars without emission control systems. It's regulatory frameworks. The role of the state is to put in those rules and then force companies to essentially innovate if they can. But the state doesn't have an obligation to make your company succeed.
Okay.
That's not the role of the state.
So Ben, you've got a big macro view, but I mean, talking about these kind of constructs that we've built and the idea that profitability is a construct, but on the other hand, the role of the state is not to make sure companies fail either, but under this framework, it almost sounds like companies should just say, well, then whatever the government says I have to do, that's enough, right? Because then I should, if that's the relationship, but do you think companies could be doing more? Should they be trying to phrase sustainability as something they can actually, like if a CEO goes to his board and says, can I present this as something I can get an ROI on? Is this something I can measure or get a return on? Is that a worthy goal? And if so, how do they measure it?
Look, you can use the word sustainability, but ultimately it's a story about cost impact or growth opportunity. You can dress it up as sustainability, but it's got to return a profit in some form. So cost impact, it could be IKEA or Unilever, who are very good at re-engineering their products to reduce raw material usage, to reduce their water footprint, and that is sustainable, but it's ultimately a cost impact story. They're trying to sell more and make more in return. So what's needed in order to change that calculation is for governments to intervene, for public policy to change the dynamics in terms of imposing penalties, raising costs, for instance, on water usage, and then it becomes easier to go to a board and say, we need to invest, because if we don't, we may go out of business, right? So there needs to be a stronger hand in order to change that calculation. Because we can talk about these leading companies, such as the IKEAs or the Uniqlos or others, but they're a small share of the manufacturing base, and it's the private sector, the smaller firms, where it's much harder to adjust their calculations. You need a government to step in to do that.
Okay. Kat, something I want to ask you a question, but first I want to make clear that we say you're global head of technology with Standard Chartered, but it doesn't mean that you run the tech stack. You're not the CTO. You work with technology companies that are with the bank, but I'm sure that gives you a good view to looking at what's going on in your company. I use Mox, your new thing. It's the most paperless experience I've ever had with the bank, but what is Standard Chartered doing? Like, of course, banks are heavily regulated, as we've talked about, and governments put the screws to them mostly to protect consumers. Not so much environment. So, but what is Standard Chartered doing in this area?
Actually, I mean, I've only been with the bank a relatively short time, a matter of months. And I've been incredibly impressed, actually, at the effort that the bank has gone to really push sustainability, not just messaging, but also some of our initiatives. So from the various reports that are showing that 95% of the cities that are impacted by climate change are actually in our footprint, which is Asia, Pacific, and Africa. Of those, they're impacted twice as much as any other city in terms of the impact of climate change, so economic impact because of climate change. So for us, we're looking at financial products as how we can actually fund moving these countries and the companies that are doing well on a carbon basis to get to net zero. So that's from that side. Now, obviously, all the big companies are looking at the obvious things, the printing, the work from home reduces your footprint, the outsourced data centers, and in data centers, are you looking at the liquids that you're using to cool rather than just air? Are you looking at the consolidation? Are you looking at changing the software to ensure that that's all happening? So there are massive moves in terms of how we should be looking at this and how you can, even if you look at the internet, the internet, when it was rolled out in companies, made an enormous impact in the amount of mail that was sent, right? In fact, almost put the post office out of business, right?
Yeah.
But it does mean that we now still print, right? So we have the other side of the problem. So often technology, so I think innovation has to happen. It has to happen fast because things are going to come from multiple different places. And so innovation is a massive thing for Stan Chart is how do we do that? How do we cut systems out? How do we drive in our buildings? How do we drive to, using sensors to actually reduce our carbon footprint?
Sure, okay. Duncan, we do want to get in with your area of expertise. It's one of the hot new things. So and I hope that everybody watching here and at home, you understand the difference between crypto and blockchain. Crypto has taken a lot of heat for how it's generated and the amount of energy it consumes, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the use of blockchain, which is something different. Duncan, you're out here at the Science Park where I know companies are driving innovation to help with environmental goals. Can you give us an example? Can you give us a real example of that?
Sure, yeah. So when we talk about blockchain, we just cannot avoid talking about the power consumption and also the relationship between the power consumption or the power used by blockchain, especially consensus protocol, and also how the environment is being protected. So let me just talk about the E of the ESG, the environmental protection part. So when we talk about blockchain, the consensus protocol, for example, the proof of work, everybody knows that it actually takes a lot of electricity consumption. But actually, if you just look deeper into the blockchain industry, we are actually moving towards using cleaner energy. And it's cheaper. For example, people are using hydraulic power plants for powering up this kind of high-speed devices to do the mining. Maybe some clean coal energy that's used in Inner Mongolia. Or maybe some of the power being generated by the solar.
Yeah.
So what we are seeing is that this is actually what the industry is going towards, is to find something which is more sustainable, while at the same time we can make more money, more profitable. Yeah. And even if you look at Ethereum, right now we are marching towards Ethereum 2.0, and we are actually making a tremendous change from proof of work to proof of stake, which basically reduces the power consumption in a very significant way as well. So I think these two things are actually coming together. In the near term, definitely we would like to boost the profitability part, but actually in the long term, in order to survive and in order to boost the profitability, we really need to think harder to see how we can innovate so that we can sustain it.
Okay, Chandran, these guys are thinking hard. As the banks are heavily regulated, but it's KYC, AML, consumer protection. But they are also doing things on KYC. But Chandran, I'm guessing you're not convinced that corporates can still get out ahead. You've got to.
Yeah, I think. The problem is sometimes this sort of reshaping the discussion is, you're going to think I'm anti the banks. No, I come from a business background. I'm against this industry. No, I'm not. I'm just saying we have our head in the sand. We need to change the conversation. So it was mentioned the big companies are doing all of these things. I'm sorry, that's wrong. I work with some of the biggest companies in the world, and they are not. So if you just look at plastics, which everyone's talking about, 20 companies in the world produce 90% of the plastics in the world. They're not small companies. So you want to talk about single use and all of that, all the hocus pocus stuff about straws, etc. That's just not the problem. The problem is essentially the entire construct of what fossil fuels, hydrocarbons are used to convert into plastic, which is a huge business model. Governments are going to have to attack that. Watch my words. They will attack it. And they will get this plastic out of the system, attacking the biggest companies. So I know the Unilevers, I know these people, but if you get right through the supply chain, you will find extraordinary, essentially, excesses in all the issues that we're talking about. So we have to be very honest about it. So let's just look at the finance industry as an example, and I like the examples you gave. But the real test would be, how many banks are getting out of essentially the fossil fuel industry? The largest investors in the fossil fuel industry are 4 American banks. How many banks actually do a stress test when they lend? It's not about switching off the lights. I mean, that's like, I'm sorry, should have been done a long time ago, all right? But we seek refuge in those nice things, recycle the paper and all of that, but without being too flippant, that's kindergarten stuff. What do banks do? They finance. So what are they financing? How many banks do a stress test on biodiversity loss? Hardly any, right? That's what we're talking about. We need a whole new conversation. And I would urge every time you come to things like this, ask the hard questions. So, I can say this, Stefan, I've been, had the privilege of working with Sebastian, with the BASF, the world's largest chemical company. And I've said to them, innovation for them shouldn't be something about digital. And even on the discussion earlier, and as soon as we talk innovation and technology, it's something digital. My friends, the most important technology going forward, I would argue, is going to be water supply and toilets. So we live in a place like Hong Kong, we just take all of these things for granted. 80% of the world's population don't have access to what you and I take for granted. So where's the innovation there? So a chemical company, and I've challenged BASF, and it's open, they know. I said, your job, innovation, is not something more digital. We need more digital things like I need a hole in my head. What we need is, what about a waterless toilet? Chemistry.
Yeah.
So when we talk technology, I'm a biochemical engineer with the engineering background and a biochemistry background. I don't think of digital.
Sure.
Digital is simply a tool. What problem are we trying to solve in the biophysical world? We don't live on a digital world. We live in a biophysical world. Yeah. And the presence of 10 billion people on the planet has a biophysical implication. Every time I eat something, I consume something, I breathe something, I dispose, and every time we all go to the toilet 7 times a day, right? That's the challenge of the planet. So I coined a phrase, the future is not digital, it's biological. So those are the things we need to have the conversation about. Not about companies recycling stuff and stuff like that. Finance, what do you finance? What externalities are you creating? Big companies, externalities. Take all your plastic back.
Sure.
Microsoft or Apple or Amazon, a business model that is essentially premised on waste, right? Take back all that junk. Let's create the supply chain.
Well, I know
that's what we should be talking about. That's the innovation. Not dicking around with little things about we're going to save a bit more paper.
Yeah, or cut the straws out.
This is really not the conversation.
So I know Tesla's a company that some people criticize and say, the only reason they are profitable is because of government subsidies, because government is supporting what they're doing in terms of energy and batteries, in particular, and electric vehicles. Kat, can you give us some examples of where technology is actually driving change? Maybe in the areas Chandran's talking about, maybe in some other areas.
Actually, I have to say this is one point that Chandran and I agree on, is that technology doesn't drive the change. Technology is purely an enabler. I mean, think of the sentence, I use technology for this, that, and the other. It is purely an enabler. But when you look at the types of things that are making a difference, it could be, and it really can come from anywhere, as I said. If you feed cows seaweed, methane reductions go down 80%. If you change your diet, if there's carbon capture, we could refreeze the poles. I mean, the list is endless. But it often has to come from these kind of innovations that companies have to be looking at ways that they can behave better, what they can be doing. And I think, we had a fairly heated discussion in our briefing session. And I have to say, I have taken some of his points on board, which was quite interesting. But I think when you're looking at, you need to almost have a scorched earth approach to innovation. Right? So when you're looking at, let's take COVID, for example, right? Now, COVID has a massive impact on all of us from an economic perspective, but we have to make a change. And look at the speed at which we developed, I'd like to, credit myself, we have developed vaccines.
You and I, Kat,
Yeah,
together
exactly.
we did it.
Absolutely.
Way to go.
So it's been done because it's a necessity. So in the beginning, when I was talking to Chandran, he's very much about, we've got to have the policy, got to do this, and that's not my school of thinking. But I do think that this point about Tesla making more money from the carbon credits, that sort of incentivization is one side. I do think there are other ways to do it, but I do agree to an extent that policy piece is what makes us change our behavior, and really agreeing that this is important enough to really burn the damn bridge behind us and move forward.
Yeah. And can finance bear pressure? No, to answer one of your points, Senator, I believe Blackstone has said that they will not invest in fossil fuels anymore. And check me on that, because I believe it was Blackstone, but some of the major players now are starting to say they will not direct client money towards fossil fuels anymore. And if so, that's huge. But I mean, Ben, you're keeping on this role. What role can financial incentives play? I mean, if a bank is like turning the lights off at night, that's great. But how can financial companies put more pressure on the kind of projects they fund and the role they play?
Well, okay, so look, I'm going to once again emphasize public policy. I really think the government is the key influencer here, right? Imposing charges, higher charges will force behavior among companies, right? So, but let's take a step back. If you're talking about the financial sector, maybe it's simply providing capital to fund those innovations, to fund the science, that will create solutions that allow us to get out of this mess.
Yeah.
That could be one area. Asking the financial sector to pick and choose between ESG compliant companies is really tough.
Yeah.
There's no data out there. There are dozens of rating companies. There are 100 of ESG data companies. Sure. The reality is we have 5% of the data we need today to really understand and to measure the impact. So, and data is just a fabulous debate change. You think of the climate, for instance, and how much extra data we have over the last 10 years that's been generated by satellite altimeters, generated by aquatic robots,
sure.
That provide us with the facts to allow us to have a robust discussion. We need those sorts of facts about business. We need those sorts of facts about our supply chain, our tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. What are they up to? How much are they consuming? How much are they wasting? And that will help to drive the debate. And it may help governments to then price raw materials or resources appropriately.
Sure. The kind of technology you're talking about can also be used in things like smart contracts, like parametric insurance is a great example. Duncan, blockchain, are there any solutions from the blockchain world that are being used in this space? Can you give us one example?
Can I have more than one?
More than one? Okay, give us the best one. Give us the best one to inspire people to do.
Yeah, I think just like what Kat said, technology is basically an enabler. So one use case is basically like using the blockchain for increasing the awareness of the environmental protection, for example, on the individual carbon credit. So for example, just imagine everybody like at the individual level, if we can keep track of all our endeavor regarding how to save this planet and how to interact with each other, and then to have this kind of like carbon credit being recorded and being tracked by using blockchain, that can be not just the technology part, but basically increase the awareness of the entire ESG perspective. And also by using blockchain, you can also improve the cybersecurity measure as well.
Sure.
The takeaway, recently I've read a few articles, but what I think is that there are two very important things that's happening in the world right now because of the pandemic as well, is the acceleration of the digital transformation. That's actually benefiting us on all aspects regarding the ESG. Another thing is the acceleration of the cloud adoption. Despite cloud computing is not something new, we are not really having, we are actually seeing a lot of great opportunities that we can actually accelerate. And because of this pandemic, we are actually seeing that the acceleration of the cloud computing is actually benefiting everybody in terms of the ESG as well.
Okay. Kat, because you work with technology companies and you kind of interface with them on how they're looking at how shareholders are putting pressure on them perhaps, you know, we're just about to wrap up here, but I'm wondering, you know, can you give us a view of like where the corporates are, where their shareholders are pushing them, and you know, regulation will come. Regulation is here. More regulation is coming. It is being fine-tuned. We've heard today that it is, you know, that I think some of us think it's not nearly enough, but we've got corporate leaders here. What more can they do? What are their shareholders asking them to do, and how can they show leadership?
I think we did this Zeronomics report that showed that 55% of executives think that companies aren't doing enough. 75% of investors think the same, that business leaders aren't doing enough. So it really is time to, you know, we all have to step up. With, sorry.
But if you ask those same leaders, they say, "Oh, but we aren't doing enough." Are you doing enough? Like, how do they react to that?
That's my point, which was, you know, when after our rather heated discussion the other day,
It's not that
it wasn't that heated. It was getting that way. But I actually watched I don't know if you saw The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. It's a movie on right now with my family, and a kid who at 13 builds a wind turbine that is able to allow them to get water, which then is able to, you know, get them 2 growing cycles in Malawi. And again, it just really makes it very clear that, and the point that Chandan made that really made me think was, we're in a bubble, right? We're in a very, very, you know, affluent area. And we're not looking at the real world. And it was a stark example of the fact that actually we're living in completely different worlds. So if we look at finance and we look at companies and saying we cannot put our money in there into fossil fuels and things like that, as I said, 95% of the companies, cities most affected are in Africa and Asia. We cut a lot of these things off. We cut off their income, right, these businesses. So there are bigger policy issues in here. But the other thing I was thinking was actually what made me change my mind about bags. It was government policy, the lights, the things like this. And so I know it's just kindergarten stuff, but corporate leaders are running their own countries, their own things. They are running their own, they are the government, right, for their organization, much as you as a parent are the government for your family. So how do you instill behavior and really try and drive a change at a small level? It's only going to be that whole, you know, Ernest Hemingway, gradually, then suddenly. Right? All of us moving together is what it's going to take.
All right. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, please thank my panel for their insights that they have provided today. I think they've done a great job. I'm very proud of them. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. You guys did a great job. And now it is your turn. If you are watching this home live around the world, take a moment and reflect on this. But here at the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park, we are going to ask you in your small groups to answer a question to discuss what you are going to do. We want to know, is sustainability, do you think it is all about green window dressing? What are you going to do? Do you see a business value in bringing these principles into action in your own company, and how are you going to do it? And I'd like to leave that with you. My name is Andrew Work from New Work Media and the Self-Storage Association Asia. Please discuss amongst yourselves. Thank you.
So after we listen to that panel discussion, the question that would be great for you to share about for your own businesses is, some people say that sustainable principles are like window dressing, green window dressing. So what do you see as value to your business, and what opportunities do you see? Who would like to start?
Probably I can start first because Dun & Bradstreet is a company with, just as what I share, corporate innovation and also our data with great coverage overall. So interesting enough, as we talk about ESG on the G side governance, we have seen high and increasing demand for the supply chain data. So basically right now when you work with a company, you don't just look at, just now what I talk about the financial health of this company, but you also look at the supply chain of this company itself, the linkages of these company, whether, who are the ultimate beneficial owners, who are the bosses of these people, are they doing the right thing, even we saw customers started looking into whether they are socially responsible. We are also, as DNB itself globally, we are also looking into ESG data. So from a business perspective, we see definitely business value because we see that customers asking for real data results and also how they're playing a part, in all of these areas. And on the other hand, as Dun & Bradstreet Hong Kong itself, we also have our enterprise learning solutions. This year, actually, we kicked off and expanded our offering into ESG corporate training and consulting. And banks even asking, and we already see immediate take-up of FI. Specifically, they have an agenda by Hong Kong Exchange, that the fact that they needed to include this in their agenda. So banks committing to this as part of the regulation, or the fact that they need to build this as a brand and being, having this in their thought, in part of their business agenda, becomes contributing to our revenue generation. So for sure, I believe that not just for Dun & Bradstreet, but I think overall for all the businesses, if you put yourself in the right roadmap in ESG, you will position rightly in front of your customers and all your stakeholders as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle.
For Vitagen, I think adopting sustainable concept to the business isn't an option, I would say. Because we are both, for what we are doing, we are both pull and push factor to the business that try to adopt for the product development being sustainable, to actually reflect the mission of our company, trying to help the manufacturers to produce safer products. And consumer will have more safer choices. And by the end of product life cycle, frankly, everything, no matter what you use, whether you're going to wash it off or just dump it, you're going to go back to the environment. So, and nowadays, especially for the younger generation of consumers, none of them want to buy something that would damage themselves potentially and damage the environment. So I think that's something that is not for my business to choose, but that's the essence and core value. But frankly, I think at the very beginning, when we try to persuade those businesses to adopt this kind of business and practice without being forced by the regulations, it wasn't easy. I still remember day back to 10 years ago, when we talk about this, all our potential clients would tell us saying, well, yes, your technology is great, it's very nice, but is it required by the government? If that's no, they don't have the urgency to use it. So we're quite lucky that the early adopters, they all, majority of them, they're from Europe, okay, where they have the highest standards of the product safety standard. And we gradually adopt this practice to China, to the rest of the world. And the motivation point is different. We tell them it's not just about being nice or what we call it green window dressing. It's actually helping them to do better in marketing, to intrinsically and inherently help them for their core R&D for future products, no hassles, especially in China, if there's something go wrong, it could be in a really big trouble. So we try to help them saying, okay, we don't curse the darkness. We try to celebrate the winners. I think that's a approach we also need to encourage them from the senior management to the middle management. Then it's a journey. It can't change overnight, but it's a journey for us.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Jimmy?
I think like Hong Kong broadband, right? We have a slogan to make Hong Kong as a better place to live. I think it's all about the balance, right? Say for example, like retail, right? We're talking about the retail. We have a downtrend of the retail sales figures. For the last like 9 months or 12 months, right? This is very serious. So everyone is looking for a solution. But the point is, right, the technology could help the solution to help the way out how, what kind of people they are walking past by the shopping mall, what kind of gender, woman, age, or whatever, right? But it's all related to the data privacy. So I think everything is all the balance, how we address the business user need, but at the same time, we could make use of the technology to improve all those like the green window dressing, whatever, right? So this is, I think, is a big topic that how we could address this.
Okay.
So from the vendor perspective, I'm seeing that more and more customers is now concerned about the sustainability. So I think this is one of the key topics. No matter what solutions are, the customer will request, will your product have your product certified in some, sustainability certification, something like that. So for our company, we start to also offer some kind of a CO2 offset service to the customer. But to be honest, in Hong Kong, I think right now more and more customers, they would like to understand more on the sustainability solutions. But I think for some company like the utility company, they are the pioneer to want to adopt this kind of solutions.
Actually, also one more thing I would like to highlight is that sustainability is actually an investment. So I think a lot of people regard sustainability as cost, as expenses. Just like you won't see innovation, R&D, business continuity as an expense, right? Because you know that this is going to contribute to a long-term value of the business. And just now, I think, the speaker also said about, the importance of, answering to the needs of the customers, as well as even the talents. We spoke about the first question we had about talent retention and attracting them. I think nowadays, especially with the pandemic, people start looking for purpose in their career. And I think nobody would want to work for a company just talk about maximizing profits in short term at the expense of the community, the society, and with the biodiversity loss and all that. But that a company has a vision to think of the next generation and also the future generations coming forward. So I think the business value doesn't just have to equate to the dollar sign, but also the business value to sustain in long run and to contribute to a much bigger picture.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And I think that leads quite aptly to a question around cost, because sustainable principles do tend to imply cost and also stringent regulations. So how valid do each of you think this is for your own business?
To be honest, right, I don't think, from my point of view, right, I don't really totally agree it is related to the cost. I think we should change our mind that it is really related to our business growth instead of the cost reduction or how to sustain the service or the equipment longer, right? So I think we could move the other way around to think of this from different angles.
Okay, may I just ask you on that, thinking of it from that angle, how will that benefit Hong Kong broadband?
I think it's just a mutual benefit. It's not only benefit to Hong Kong broadband, but also benefit to the community. Say, for example, right, if you look at the technology could help you to grow the business, right? So your business angle actually look at the other way around. It's not the technology help you to save costs, to help you to, sustain for the longer business. Yeah, this is totally different.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Anita.
I think the whole presence of Vitagen is to help those companies to be sustainable, to help them to grow the business, to help them to do the product better, safer, and more efficient. And I think that's a whole meaning of the presence of the company. So, you know,